The black Mercedes was rushing along a quiet country road, kicking up dust clouds in the summer air. Nikolai sat in the front passenger seat, comfortably nestled in the soft leather, and not paying attention to the luxury that surrounded him. His gaze was fixed on the pastoral scenery passing by outside the window, endless golden fields lined with trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn autumn colors. But despite the fact that he was looking out the window, Nikolai's thoughts were far away. He was thinking back to the early days of his father's third marriage, when Nicholas was a grown man of 25 and Michael had taken a new young wife named Maria. She brought with her a young daughter, Natalia, who was only 5 years old at the time. Nikolai remembered how Maria held little Natalia on her hip, how the little girl clung to her mother with round and trusting eyes. At the time, Natalia had seemed to Nikolai like a little sister, sweet and innocent. But now, as the car approached its destination, Natalia sat modestly in the back seat behind Nikolai. She was no longer a child, but a pretty young woman of 23, a recent university graduate. Her luxurious brown hair was pulled back into a sleek ponytail, revealing the long line of her neck and the perfect curves of her jaw. Nicholas looked around and met his gaze with her wide-open green eyes, so similar to her mother's. When she smiled softly at him, Nicholas felt his heart clench with longing. How could it be that little Natalia had grown into such an exquisite creature? Over the years, Nikolai had watched her transformation, trying not to notice his awareness of her beauty growing as she matured. It had been so natural when she'd taken a job as his personal secretary after graduation, and her sweet warmth had lit up his days. But now, Nikolai could no longer deny the attraction he felt for his half-sister, no matter how hard he tried. Nikolai took his eyes away from Natalia's alluring gaze and shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His thoughts inevitably returned to her mother Maria, the woman who had destroyed his family all those years ago. He remembered how shocked he had been when he first met the sophisticated Maria at his father's 66th birthday party. With her cascade of golden hair and alluring green eyes, she had captivated Michael that same evening. She soon became Natalia's new stepmother and Michael's trophy wife. However, Nicholas soon discovered that Maria was more than just a gold digger. He recalled with a keen sense of shame the forbidden passion that had erupted between them that summer day on the way to the camp to see little Natalia. After their hot embrace in the woods, Nicholas almost could not look Mary in the eyes. Despite the years that had passed, the memories of their illicit meeting kept him awake. Suddenly, Nicholas realized that he could no longer bear the tension spilling over his body. When the car overcame a winding bend, he shouted to the driver, "Stop!" The Mercedes pulled onto the gravel curb, and Nikolai opened the door, desperate for fresh air. "Let's go for a walk," he suggested to Natalia, using the affectionate diminutive of her name. "My legs are stiff from sitting." Natalia's heart-shaped face lit up. With great pleasure, she exclaimed. As soon as the car stopped, she got out gracefully, and the skirt of her sundress swept beautifully around her long, full-figured legs. Side by side, Nikolai and Natalia walked along the empty road, their path illuminated by the shadows of the trees. Natalia chatted animatedly, while Nikolai remained silent, wrestling with his demons. Soon they came upon a small pond set back from the road, its surface glistening opaque emerald green in the late afternoon sunlight. Natalia hurried to the mossy shore and knelt down, running her slender fingers over the dark water. Nikolai's pulse quickened as he watched her innocent play. When she turned to him and glared radiantly over her shoulder, her hair loose and falling over one eye, Nikolai lost his fragile composure. He walked over to Natalia and squeezed her delicate hand tightly, no longer trusting himself. "Natalia, I have something very important to tell you," he began hoarsely. Natalia stared at Nikolai with green eyes widened with surprise. Before he could utter a word, she ripped her hand from his grasp. As she broke free, she darted into the shelter of the trees lining the pond. Nikolai rushed after her, cursing himself. What had possessed him to blurt out the beginning of a confession? He should have known better than to frighten sweet, innocent Natalia by revealing the perverse desire that drove him. Yet Nikolai couldn't let her run away without explaining himself. He rushed into the woods, branches whipping at his face. Natalia's brown hair flashed ahead, fluttering behind her as she disappeared under the ledge of the forest. "Natalia, stop! Please wait!" shouted Nikolai desperately. He scrambled through the thicket, the branches crackling beneath his Italian leather shoes. This forest reminded him eerily of the forest he had traveled through with Natalia's mother Maria many years ago. The parallels made his stomach rumble with self-disgust. What was he doing letting history repeat itself? At last, Nikolai broke through a grove of slender white birches. Their flaking trunks glowed in the gloom of the forest like beacons. Natalia stood at the edge of the small grove, resting one hand on the bark of a birch and trying to catch her breath. Nikolai slowed his running, his pulse thudding in his ears. Natalia watched his approach warily, but made no move to rush away again. He stopped a few steps away from her, looking at her helplessly. Her hair was completely loose and scattered over her shoulders in unruly waves. She looked as wild and untamed as the forest around them. "Tatka," began Nikolai pleadingly. Natalia raised one small hand. "Don't come any closer." Her voice trembled, but her thin chin was stubbornly raised. Nikolai ran his fingers through his hair. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I didn't mean to scare you," he said pitifully. "It's okay." Natalia leaned her back against a slender birch tree. Her breathing now slowed to normal. "Only you caught me off guard." "What did you want to tell me?" Nikolai squeezed his eyes shut, wanting to rewind back the last 15 minutes and erase his shocking behavior from his memory. What could he say now? That he'd brought Natalia to the backwoods to confess that he'd fallen in love with her? The idea was absurd. She was his half-sister, closer to a daughter than a lover. Finding out his real feelings would make her disgusted. There was silence between them, broken only by the melodious chirping of birds in the trees. When Nicholas finally plucked up courage and met Natalia's gaze again, she was looking at him with a strange expression. Her full lips were slightly ajar, either from surprise or bewilderment. Emboldened, Nikolai took a slow step toward Natalia. This time she stayed on her feet, her gaze fixed on his face. Not daring to breathe, Nikolai moved closer until only one step separated them. This close, he could see the pulse fluttering frantically at the base of her throat. Natalia reached behind her back to grasp the slender trunk of the birch tree, her fingers digging into the peeling bark. Nikolai moistened his parched lips, desperately searching for the right words. "Natalia, ever since you became my secretary, I've tried my best to think of you only as my assistant," he admitted hoarsely. "As Michael's precious daughter. But I can no longer deny the truth, you have completely bewitched me. When I look at you, I forget everything in the world." Natalia looked at him in silence. Nikolai took her stunned silence as permission to continue. The dam inside him was crumbling. All the emotions he had held back for so long came rushing in. "You are so beautiful, Natalia," he whispered. Consumed by reckless desire, he reached up to tuck a silky strand of hair behind her ear and touched her cheek with his fingertips. Natalia flinched at his touch, but didn't pull away. Emboldened, Nikolai slowly ran his fingers along the side of her thin throat. Under his rough fingers, the skin was petal soft. When he reached her collarbones, Natalia moaned softly, closing her eyes. The sound shattered the last vestiges of Nikolai's restraint. With a muffled groan, he roughly pulled Natalia to him and dug his lips into her sweet lips in a heated kiss. Natalia pressed herself against Nikolai, responding to his passionate kiss with equal fervor. Her fingers tangled in his hair, her nails digging into his scalp. Nicholas slid his hands down and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her slender body harder against his muscular frame. As their kisses grew more heated, Nikolai maneuvered Natalia until her back was pressed against the coniferous birch. She clung to his broad shoulders and gasped as he drew a line of fiery kisses down her throat. "I've wanted you for so long, sweetheart. Nicholas moaned, pressing himself against her skin. "You're driving me crazy." "Show me how much," Natalia whispered, her voice throaty with desire. She guided his hands to the tiny mother-of-pearl buttons running down the front of her sundress. Nikolai needed no further encouragement. With trembling fingers, he released each button, breathing raggedly. Finally, he unbuttoned two sides of the dress, revealing Natalia's exquisite body clad only in a lace bra and panties. He gently ran his palms from her waist, up the gentle curves of her hips and ribs. When his thumbs touched the underside of her breasts, Natalia let out a desperate whimper. "Please, Nikolai," she begged, wriggling in his arms. She was the most ravishing creature Nikolai had ever seen, a goddess descended to earth. Overwhelmed with possessive lust, he sank into her mouth again with a greedy kiss. At that moment, a furious chorus of birds sounded very close by. Two crows flew from the upper branches of a birch tree and flew into the forest. Nikolai and Natalia recoiled from each other, gasping for breath. A shrill, alarming cry sharply reminded them that they were not alone in the forest. "We have to go back," Natalia said uncertainly after a moment. With trembling fingers, she buttoned the front of her crumpled sundress and did not meet Nikolai's gaze. Nikolai ran a hand through his hair, trying to regain control of his raging emotions. "You're right," he agreed gruffly. Taking her under his elbow, he led Natalia out of the secluded birch grove and back to the pond. They walked in tense silence through the dense forest until at last they came to the grassy shore. There, Nicholas let go of Natalia's hand and strode forward, not trusting his willpower. When they came to the black Mercedes standing on the curb, Nikolai silently opened the back door in front of Natalia. She averted her gaze and, without arguing, gracefully ducked inside. Clenching his jaws, Nikolai sat down in the front passenger seat. He barked at the driver to take them home. For the next few days, Natalia was quiet in the office, answering Nikolai's work questions briefly, but otherwise avoiding him. Her behavior caused Nikolai frustration and heartache. At night, he lay awake, tormented by fantasies of their meeting in the birch grove. He realized that he had to stop this madness before it ruined them both. And yet Nikolai could not resist when one evening Natalia suddenly appeared on the doorstep of his house. Her eyes were huge and vulnerable in her pale face. "I've tried to forget about what happened between us, Kolya," she confessed in a quiet voice. "But I can't stop thinking about you." Nikolai's restraint crumbled. With a muffled scolding, he roughly dragged her inside and slammed the door behind them with force. Then he pressed Natalia against the wall and kissed her greedily. This time, there was nothing in their way. Afterward, they lay on Nikolai's bed, exhausted and entwined. Natalia traced lazy patterns on his bare chest with her manicured fingernail, and Nikolai stroked her disheveled hair. He knew he could never let her go. She was his destiny. And so Nikolai took Natalia as his wife, performing a lavish wedding that made society's tongues wag. Her mother Maria glowed proudly throughout the ceremony, wiping her eyes from time to time. "I'm so happy for you both," she declared at the reception, kissing Natalia's flushed cheek. "Welcome to the family, officially this time." In private, Maria confessed to Nicholas, "I've always hoped that someday you and Natalia would find your way back to each other. You'd make a terrific couple." Nicholas only smiled furtively and brought Maria's slender hand to his lips in a courting kiss. In the honeymoon years that followed, Nicholas idolized his new bride with a passion that never faded. When a son was born to Natalia 9 months after their wedding on the island, Nicholas wept as he held the tender infant, that living symbol of their love. But even after that, Maria remained a frequent visitor to their home, often staying late into the evening to babysit her grandson. "Let me help you choose a nanny and a housekeeper," she urged Natalia. "I'll make sure you have only the best helpers. You don't have to worry about the household minutiae, dear." Laughing, Natalia readily agreed. So pleasantly, the years flew by for the reunited family, until one fateful evening, when Maria looked up from playing with her grandson on the floor of the nursery and noticed something amiss. "You look so pale and drained, darling," she exclaimed, rising quickly to her feet. "Sit down now. You need rest." Maria's comment brought Nikolai out of his reverie. He sank down in his chair, rubbing his temples tiredly. "You look exhausted, my love," Natalia remarked, taking a seat on the armrest beside him. She raised an eyebrow concernedly, gazing into his face. "Everything okay?" Nikolai managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, just tired after work," he tried to reassure his wife. He was actually feeling exhausted, keeping up the frantic pace of work in the office. Maria and Natalia exchanged a speaking glance. "This solves everything. I'm booking us tickets to Cyprus tomorrow," Maria announced. "You both clearly need a vacation." Nikolai started to protest, but Maria silenced him with one elegantly raised finger. "No arguments. I won't take no for an answer." The next evening, the three of them settled into a luxurious oceanfront villa, watching the sun sink into the azure of the Mediterranean Sea. Relaxing in a soft chaise lounge chair with a glass of ouzo, Nicholas had to admit that Maria's scheme was attractive. When was the last time he and Natalia had run away like this? Just the two of them. Lately, work had him chained to his desk from dawn until well into the night. He'd been very neglectful of his fiancée. After dinner, Natalia appeared on the moonlit terrace of the villa in a swaddled robe, her hair spilling freely over her shoulders. Nikolai's pulse quickened at the sight of her. When she held out a slender hand in a gesture of invitation, he readily allowed himself to be drawn into the luxurious master bedroom. "I've missed you, my love," Natalia murmured as she snuggled against Nikolai's chest. Her words tore at his heart. Had he been so distracted by business that he hadn't noticed how his obsession was increasingly excluding his own wife? Stroking Natalia's hair, Nikolai silently vowed to change. Tomorrow he would turn off his phone and give her his full attention. No more answering work messages at all hours of the day and night. He owed Natalia much and more. As the golden morning light streamed into the luxurious bedroom, Nikolai slowly awoke, savoring the warmth of Natalia's body pressed against him. For once, he didn't feel the urge to check his email immediately. Today would be different. He ordered breakfast in bed so they could feed each other plump berries and toast drizzled with honey. Afterward, they exchanged lazy kisses until Natalia rolled with throaty laughter. "As much as I'd like to continue, we need to enjoy the beach." Wearing swimsuits and sunglasses, Nicholas and Natalia strolled hand in hand down the villa's private strip of beach. Natalia spread out brightly colored towels, and they reclined blissfully on the sun-warmed sand, entwining their legs and gazing out at the gem-studded sea. As Natalia fell asleep, her beautiful face relaxed. Nicholas watched her fondly. His heart was bursting with love and affection for his sweet bride. How could he deprive her of his total devotion? Once again, he silently resolved not to let his business dominate their lives. Those serene days flew by in the warmth and beauty of Cyprus, reminding Nicholas of what really mattered. On their last night, Maria hosted a candlelit dinner for them on the beach, accompanied by a violinist. "To thank you both for the joy you've brought me all these years," she explained, raising her champagne flute. Laughing, Natalia jumped to her feet and hugged her mother. Nicholas kissed Maria's hand, his throat constricted with love for this wonderful woman. Much later, Nicholas couldn't sleep for a long time after Natalia drifted into slumber, her body soft and supple. His heart was overflowing with love for both his beautiful wife and her mother. Thanks to Maria, he now realized what a precious gift Natalia was that he had almost squandered. After this blissful vacation, he would reevaluate his priorities and give Natalia the devotion she deserved.